Hey Eric, check out this Les Paul I just bought.
Yeah, that one's a fake, bro. All right, so here in front of us we have this gorgeous looking, what we appears to be a Gibson Les Paul guitar. And at first glance you're like, oh cool, it's a Gibson Les Paul, how nice. But when you really take your eyes and like focus on the item here itself, you can see that there are some things that glaringly jump out at you that make it not so being a real Gibson guitar. And the first thing that we've noticed was the neck. Now, on a real Gibson guitar, a real Gibson guitar is a one-piece neck with two little wings that are glued to the side to make the flares. On this neck here, we have three neck joints. So this is actually a three-piece neck. The heel is one piece here. There's a joint right here. And there's also a scarf joint right about here that shows that this is a three-piece neck. Gibson does not do a three-piece neck. It's actually one piece. So that is the first telltale sign that this is actually a counterfeit guitar. Item number 2, the logo. Glancing at the logo and the Les Paul signature itself, you wouldn't think anything of it. That's because whoever's made this guitar is banking that you are just going to glance at it and not actually scrutinize it. Well, if you look closely at the font of the Les Paul signature, the font is a little bit different than an actual real Gibson guitar. The P and the L's, the shape of it, though close, is a little bit bigger than normal. Also, on the Gibson logo, while it looks similar, if you look at a authentic Gibson guitar logo on an actual Gibson and then look at this one, you'll see the bottom and some of the corners are squared off, whereas on an actual Gibson logo, it is really rounded off there. The third thing we have on this is the truss rod cover. This one here is actually screen printed, and an authentic Gibson truss rod cover will be actually engraved. Now I understand players every now and then will lose their truss rod cover and go online and find a cheap replacement, and that's perfectly fine. But another telltale sign is that this is actually screen printed and not engraved, so not a real Gibson piece. So the fourth thing on this is, it's kind of obvious but not to the trained eye, would be the bound frets. On a real authentic Gibson guitar, the frets are actually bound. Now there's a couple exceptions to that. The Les Paul Studio and the Tributes, some of the lower end price point, won't have bound frets, but this is supposed to be a classic, as it says on the truss rod. This would actually have bound frets. Now bound frets are where the binding on the neck here overlaps the edge of the frets. As you can see, this does not have it. The fifth thing that we noticed was the jack plate. This jack plate, being rectangle, for one, usually all real Gibson have a perfectly square, rounded edged jack plate. Also, it's recessed in the middle. Gibson jack plates are not recessed like this. This looks more indicative of something you would find on an inexpensive Chinese or Asian-made guitar, which this most likely is. On the back here, you can see the wiring. Having looked inside and being a Les Paul Classic owner, the wiring does not look like this inside of a Les Paul Classic, or for that matter, any Les Paul. Additionally, looking in the control cavity here, the pots aren't branded Gibson. Normally when you buy a Gibson guitar and you open the control cavity, you look at the pots and they all say Gibson on them. Additionally, there is a grounding plate that's usually in the bottom of the control cavity that most all Gibsons have, and this does not have that. So that's missing. The pots are not branded Gibson, nor is the wiring correct to be a Gibson guitar. So there is that. Now here are some bonus tips that won't always prop up, but you keep an eye on. These are things we want to keep an eye on here. The first one is finish flaws. If you look at this guitar here, you will notice that the finish does not look indicative of a regular Gibson guitar. If you look at other Gibsons that are authentic, and then look at the color and finish on this one here is a bit orangey in color. Not a true like deep mahogany type of red that you usually see on a Gibson. Also, there are spots on the body. You can see one right here, also right here, and in the pocket here there is just some finish flaws that wouldn't cut it at a Gibson factory's quality assurance. If anything, this guitar would probably be scrapped and redone, and this wouldn't fly at a Gibson factory here. Something else to look out for, that's a bonus tip, is the screw holes on a truss rod cover. Now obviously this one has 2 holes, and Gibson truss rod covers have 2 holes, but we have seen on Counterfeit Gibsons a 3 screw truss rod cover. So if you see one of those, most likely it's not going to be a real Gibson guitar. So finally, you want to ask yourself, and when you're vetting the instrument closely, is how much was paid for it and where was it found? Obviously, if this were a real Gibson Les Paul Classic, you would look to spend about $1,200 to $1,500. Now, if you were to look in a pawn shop and say, oh, look, there's a Gibson Classic for $500 or $800, that's probably too good of a deal, and it's probably not real. So be on the lookout. Scrutinize every detail. If it's too good of a deal to be true, then it probably is.